This Thursday, the Baltimore Ravens will travel to Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City to take on the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs in the first game of the 2024 NFL season. There are many storylines going into this season opener for both teams. The first and most obvious is the outcome of the AFC Championship game and how the Ravens, the team with the best record in football last year, were held to only 10 points against the Chiefs in Baltimore. And while many of the players for both teams are still here, there is a lot that has changed over this past offseason. We're going to dive into each of these teams' strengths and potential weaknesses going into this matchup to try to get an idea of what type of game we might see. Both of these teams are great in season openers, with each starting quarterback only losing one in each of their careers. Both teams have had relatively healthy preseasons, only really losing one potential starter each for the first few weeks of the season, Marquise Brown for the Chiefs and Arthur Maulet for the Ravens. Will the Ravens' defense be as dominant as it was last year? Is Travis Kelce still the top tight end in the league? With so many questions to answer, it's time to get to the analysis. Let's get to it. Welcome in, everyone. This is Jordan with Ravens Flash Report, and I know everyone listening is happy to know that football is back. With the first game of the season being Ravens at the Chiefs, the NFL has to be given credit from a business and money-making standpoint. As a Ravens fan, I'm glad the NFL didn't make us wait too long for this revenge game. Having said that, I am curious how the Chiefs fans feel about this rematch against Baltimore so soon after last year's playoff game. Now, as I did all last year in my game previews, I will be starting with the Ravens' opponent first as a courtesy. Let's start by taking a look at quarterback Patrick Mahomes. With a record of 5-1 in season openers and logging 20 touchdowns to only one interception, it's no wonder Mahomes is in a tier of his own. Last year, Mahomes was without his favorite target in tight end Travis Kelce. You could tell that he was missing him too, as over the next 6 games, Mahomes targeted Kelce 59 times, of which Kelce caught 48 for 525 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, last year could certainly be considered a down year for Patrick Mahomes, as he threw for just under 4,200 yards, 27 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, and had a passer rating of 92.6. Granted, this would look like a good year for most starting quarterbacks, but not for Patrick Mahomes. What is also undeniable until proven otherwise is that at this point, Patrick Mahomes almost always has his way with the Baltimore Ravens. Looking at the stats of his 4 regular season games against the Ravens, he's 3-1 with a 71.78% completion percentage. He's averaging almost 370 yards a game while throwing a combined 12 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions. Overall, his passer rating is 119.1 on average, and even that is slightly brought down by his first game against us in 2018. When it comes to the Ravens dealing with Patrick Mahomes, we have to hope that our defense continues to start the season hot as it has over the past several years. If Mahomes is allowed to heat up and connect with guys like Kelce, Rice, and Smith-Schuster early in this game, it could put a real damper on the start of the season for the Ravens. Moving on to the Chiefs' pass catchers, we can see from last year that Mahomes liked throwing the ball around to many different receivers. We can also see that Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice were far and away his favorite targets. This year, however, Mahomes has more quality pass catchers to throw to. Rice, of course, will still be highly targeted, but in addition to him, the Chiefs drafted speedster Xavier Worthy in the first round of this year's draft, and signed 2 veteran wideouts in Marquise Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster, which should both be upgrades over Marquise Valdes-Scantling and Kadarius Toney. As stated before, Brown will not be available for the season opener against his former team, but should still prove valuable throughout the season. Moving on to the Chiefs' tight ends and running backs, we see a familiar cast with the return of Travis Kelce, Isaiah Pacheco, Noah Gray, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. While Kelce is certainly Mahomes' favorite target, Noah Gray performed admirably last season as tight end number 2 for this team, and with Pacheco and Edwards-Helaire capable receivers out of the backfield, this offense looks to be extremely dynamic and dangerous for yet another season. When you look at the Chiefs' ground game, though, there's really only one name that the Ravens have to be on the lookout for: Isaiah Pacheco. Last year, Pacheco dominated in rushing attempts and rushing touchdowns while maintaining a decent average of 4.6 yards per attempt. Last year in the playoffs, the Ravens held the Chiefs to 89 yards on the ground and no rushing touchdowns. They're going to have to do the same thing to keep this Chiefs team from overwhelming them. When it comes to the Chiefs' defense, they did a phenomenal job at keeping opposing offenses off the field. They ranked 3rd best in first downs allowed and 2nd best in both points allowed and yards allowed. The secondary only ranked 27th in interceptions with 8, but that's what you would expect when they get their opponents off the field so quickly. They also ranked 4th in passing yards allowed with just over 3,000, and also ranked 4th in passing touchdowns allowed with 19 on the season. The weakness to this Chiefs defense last year was against the run, and although they allowed only 10 rushing touchdowns, which was good enough for 4th, they also ranked 18th in rushing yards allowed with 1,925 and 24th in yards per attempt allowed at 4.5. I'm sure this sounds familiar at this point, but the Ravens would do well in this game to run the ball effectively. When it comes to defensive players that the Ravens need to be concerned about when facing the Chiefs, there are of course several of them, but to me the most problematic ones are going to be defensive tackle Chris Jones, literally one of the best interior defensive linemen in the game right now, and the All-Pro is coming off of a 10.5 sack season. This new Ravens offensive line has their work cut out for them trying to keep Jones out of the backfield in their first game together. Next up, we have defensive end George Karlaftis. Not to be outdone by Jones, Karlaftis also had himself a 10.5 sack season last year while adding 47 combined tackles and 17 QB hits. Lamar is going to have to be aware of both of these guys getting after him all game. Then we move to the secondary with safety Justin Reed. The leader in tackles for this Chiefs team last year with 95, Reed also added 3 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception, and 7 pass deflections. The Ravens may have Kyle Hamilton, but Justin Reed is also an extremely versatile safety for this Chiefs defense. The last one that I'll cover here is defensive back Trent McDuffie, who's coming off of an all-pro season after logging 7 pass deflections, 5 forced fumbles, 3 sacks, and only 2 touchdowns allowed in the regular season. He had a completion percentage against him in the playoffs of only 34.6% after allowing only 9 receptions while being targeted 26 times. Needless to say, if McDuffie isn't rusty in Week 1, the Ravens need to be careful when targeting whoever he's covering. With that, the Chiefs' offensive and defensive stars are mostly accounted for, so let's move on to the Baltimore Ravens and take a look at how they might be able to go into Kansas City and start Week 1 off with a win in Patrick Mahomes' own house. The way I see it, the Ravens' best chance at beating the Chiefs in this game comes down to 2 major things. The first is defense. We saw the Ravens' defense in the postseason hold Patrick Mahomes to 17 points in the first half and none in the second. Now, to be fair, the Ravens did lose several playmakers in the offseason, but Roquan Smith, Kyle Hamilton, Justin Madubuike, Kyle Van Noy, Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Stevens, and Marcus Williams are still here. Both the backbone and stars of this defense are going to have to step up in this matchup and try to contain one of the league's best quarterbacks and offenses. The second thing the Ravens have to do in this game is keep Patrick Mahomes off the field as much as possible, which means they need to win the time of possession battle. While it is true that Greg Roman's offense was lacking in some areas, the one thing he was good at doing was eating up the clock and keeping opposing offenses off the field. If Todd Monken can find a way to extend Ravens' offensive drives while keeping his improved passing concepts, Ravens' offenses will not only be scoring points, but they'll be limiting Patrick Mahomes' opportunities to respond. It sounds simple when I put it that way, doesn't it? Keep Patrick Mahomes off the field, and when he is on the field, stop him. Easy, right? Now, obviously, we know that that's not the case, and I don't know if there's a better example of something being easier said than done. The Ravens' defense in the playoffs last year showed that this group could limit Patrick Mahomes' offensive potency. But this is Week 1, and while this defense is talented and many of their stars and leaders are still on the roster, we just don't know if they're going to come out guns blazing against a Chiefs offense who also really hasn't lost any of their star power. The X factor in this game for me comes down to Lamar Jackson. Shocking, I know, but how Lamar comes out and plays against this Chiefs defense who had him running for his life and catching his own passes the last time they met is going to be a big indicator for how this offense will play in Week 1. I'm not trying to put it all on Lamar's shoulders so early in the season, especially after how often the Ravens have done so in his career. But if Lamar can be effective from the pocket and feed guys like Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, and Isaiah Likely, while getting guys like Rashad Bateman and Nelson Aguilar involved early, it's going to go a long way for what might be a struggling run game early in the season. Basically, the Ravens may have to start this year off by using the pass game to open up the run game, something they haven't had to do often but has worked well for them in the past, like it did against Detroit last year. This is Week 1, and so I'm not going to sit here and act as though I have a real prediction or even a projection for how this game might end. But what I will give you is 2 scenarios about how I believe this game could possibly go. Scenario 1. This is the bad ending. The Ravens' offensive line is unfortunately not ready to deal with a pass rush as good as Kansas City. Lamar unfortunately starts out the year similar to how it ended last year, where he's running for his life. Derrick Henry was a great addition to this Ravens offense, but with run blocking being the primary concern for this offensive line, he can't really get it going yet. With Lamar having to simply stay upright as best he can, the passing game is going to suffer as well as the Ravens' ability to score. For the Chiefs on offense, I can see it going somewhat similar to last year and them having difficulty scoring, but with it being so early in the season and some players on defense not in 60 minutes of football shape, the Chiefs might be able to take advantage of them later in the game, especially if the defense is forced to be out there more than we'd like them to be because the offense struggles to keep drives going and score points. Scenario 2. This is a better ending for the Ravens fans, but also not unrealistic. As I've stated earlier, both of these quarterbacks have a proven track record for starting off the season extremely well. Lamar Jackson would shock no one by coming out and lighting up this Kansas City defense with accurate throws from the pocket and gashing them with his legs now that he is apparently even faster than ever before. The Chiefs' defensive line might be able to take some advantage of the Ravens' new offensive line not being in total sync just yet, but if the Ravens coaching staff have learned anything from last year, it's that their new weapon Derrick Henry should be fed often. As I mentioned in Scenario 1, this Ravens defense still has most of its leaders and star power that it had from last year, and with defenses typically starting out better than offenses, generally speaking, it's not crazy to think that the Ravens defense might be too much for this Kansas City offense to handle in Week 1. Basically, they could be caught flat-footed like they were in Week 1 last year against the Detroit Lions, even with Travis Kelce healthy and available. Even with these two scenarios, it's more likely that we see a game somewhere in between. Both of these teams are going to be extremely competitive all year and may even meet each other again in the postseason. I don't know if the Ravens win in Week 1 against the defending Super Bowl champions in their own stadium, but as long as the offensive line looks decent, the defense is moving and communicating well, and Lamar and his receivers seem to be on the same page, I'm not going to worry too much about the final score. But I think the Ravens win 24-17. Well, guys, that's going to be the end of this Week 1 preview for the Ravens versus the Chiefs. I know I said it in the beginning, but I am so glad that football is back. If you enjoyed this preview, go ahead and leave it a like. Subscribe if you're new and excited for a new season of Ravens football, and comment down below your final score prediction for this game in the comment section. As always, guys, stay safe out there, and go Ravens.